So, yeah, hi, Tom. Tom Blom
Hi, Joe.
is here, yes. He's not that far. Where are you, Tom?
I'm in Atlanta, so about 780 miles south of you, 800
Yeah.
miles.
Yeah, that's nothing. Much warmer climes and much quieter, I guess, is it so?
Yeah, so our governor down here was Governor Kemp was the first one after this whole COVID-19 and the corona pandemic and the kind of the lockup that happened around the country. I think Governor
Uh-huh.
Kemp was the first one to open life back up to a certain extent in Georgia. So it's been pretty active considering some of the other places that I've read about and
Uh-huh.
restrictions that are still active in some of the other states.
But he caught some heat for it, right?
Yes,
In the
you
beginning,
could say that.
especially.
I think there was actually some disagreement between him as the governor and then the president, who those two were pretty well aligned until there was some public
Uh-huh.
criticism of Kemp's decision from Washington, D.C.
Yeah, but so far so good, right? So far you're fine in terms of, there's no staggering statistics regarding the.
I have not
Yeah.
seen any data that would indicate that it was a major misstep,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it is actually true toward the other side, where some of the other states, especially in the South, have started to open up. I think Florida. I read this morning, if I remember correctly, that Jacksonville
Mm-hmm.
has now accepted the Republican convention this year under the bans or the request from the
Wow.
president that it would be a full bore event.
Yeah, I haven't heard this one, but it's good news because people need to go someplace. That's
Yeah, and it's
impossible.
interesting, and
Yeah,
and it's really,
yeah.
I mean,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
that same conversation, and I'm sorry for interrupting. The same
No.
conversation is actually happening over in Europe, where, I mean, it's summertime, so a lot of people, cherish their summer vacations, and especially from the northern climates,
Mm-hmm.
Germany in
Sure.
particular. They're looking to go to Italy, they're looking to go to Spain. So the EU states, the European Union states, have pretty much amongst each other, agreed that they can start to open things back up. But Turkey, being one of the summer destinations for
Mm-hmm.
the Northern Europeans, is not in the same position because Turkey is not part of the EU yet.
So they closed or they open? What's the?
They are trying to get an agreement with the European Union to open up to the same extent
Mm-hmm.
that what's called the Schengen zone, which is
Right.
the
Right.
the
Right.
European Union zone where travel is freely available among the different countries.
Mm. Let me ask you. Do you remember how we met? We met just
I
once, right?
Yes, physically we only met
Historically, yeah.
once. Yeah, and I don't even remember the name of the club, but it was a club that I found through, I believe, back then it was I
Lolita,
can't.
something like that. I think.
It
Was it?
was a more libertarian. I think it was a libertarian organization, a libertarian-leaning
Yeah,
organization
there
where
was
you and
some
I
guy
met.
who had political ambitions, so he was kind of emceeing the debate or something, some blonde guy. But I think the place was called Lolita. It has nothing to do with the purpose of our gathering there.
Yeah,
Nabokov had
it
nothing to do
seems
with that.
I seem to remember that it was a library, or at least a place just full of
Hmm.
reading
Books, yeah, yeah.
material.
It's a popular piece of furniture in element of furniture in New York. People kind of think they look smart when they have books. That's how it is. I think it was a discussion. The discussion was between me and David Sachs, and the conversation was kind of a debate regarding which deli is the best in New York. And I was on behalf of Katz's Delicatessen, and I was covering the Katz's Delicatessen, and he was talking about something. Oh, he's a Canadian. He was talking about some Montreal pastrami and the tradition of doing it there. And he is being a journalist. He of course beat me into the ground. You couldn't see my beret,
I do remember that we ended up going to Katzs, and now that you mention that, and I believe Katzs was the big deli that was featured in When Harry Met Sally, in that movie with Tom Hanks, and was it
Still
Sally
is.
Field?
Yeah, I spent some time with them. I built them a website, taking them online, and rooting for them in every place that was interested in their history, in their glamour, if you may say so. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
It's a glamorous place, but nevertheless, after over 120 years, 132, something like that, yeah. Somehow I got bad with math right off the bat. But they're around over 125 years, and they're people who are exceptional about their pastrami in particular. So yeah, we had this discussion. We went into the weeds regarding Jewish traditions on the Lower East Side, and then there was you, right, who had a question regarding certain details that I may not remember because this was 15 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, this is going on,
Yeah,
on 15 years. Yeah.
Yeah, and since then we hooked up on some electronic means, and there we were posting and responding to each other's questions and concerns and jokes, and it's pretty, in my behalf, it's a pretty heartfelt feeling, if I may say so. My English got them. Yeah.
No, it's actually fascinating with just from a technological perspective. If you think about it these days, I mean, everybody knows this. I mean, everybody is using their method of communicating via social media, whether it's Twitter, whether it's, I think Instagram is the now super famous one, whether it's Facebook and some other channels. And I think it's just fascinating that you're able, and for me personally, I stay in touch with some people over in Germany because that's where I still have maintain some friendships. And I think it's just, I really appreciate technology. I have always appreciated technology for as long as I can remember, not just computer technology, but other technology as well. I mean, just recently we had the SpaceX rocket going back into space. And if you think about, how space exploration has advanced from where it started at one point with the Russians initially beating us with I think it was the monkey and then Yuri Gagarin. And it's very, very interesting. And then the other thing that I'll add to that is some of the documentaries that are available on demand these days, where some years ago you could only, you had your 3 channels. I mean, this goes decades back. But there's some very informational stuff that I found on some of the portals like Netflix and Amazon Prime and so forth. So actually, we recently cut the cable in our household, and we subscribed to Sling, and there's some really great stuff on the History Channel about. I watched Washington the other day and got into Jefferson a little bit. Just really interesting stuff.
No, there's a lot of quality stuff, and I love the old television, old humor, and that is kind of also like a sideline of my thinking that our ability to record music and the shows and books in particular, they kind of served a little double purpose, because why read new books? Because unknown books, because since you can read the old excellent ones, right? So it's hard for me to balance. I'd rather go to the older stuff than the newer things that the things that served as inspiration to those who created,
Yeah, and then, I mean, when you
things.
think about that, you think about that and kind of go back several centuries and where the printed word was kind of not necessarily invented, but was developed after books before then.
Very refreshing for me. Let me ask you something. Why I wanted to have this conversation on camera and for everybody who would have time and desire to tune in. I know that you're a big pro-America guy, pro-U.S. guy. Am I wrong?
Yes, you could say that.
I can say that. Yeah,
I'm red, white, and blue.
Yeah. So, how come you have an accent? We usually associate, I mean, not us, but the media, the people who are rush to judgment like every 3 seconds. They associate people who are pro-America with those who are not immigrants, those who are like rednecks. I say I have redneck. It's the summer, hitting on me, and that's the part of me that kind of vulnerable. Yeah, well, I kind of feel rednecky. I have no I mean, you're closer to the South, of course, than I am in New York. I've seen movies. I see the interpretations. So how come you're an immigrant, feel so deeply about this country?
So
you're an
I'll
immigrant,
start.
right? I'm setting you up.
I am an immigrant. I was born and raised in West Germany, about 100 kilometers, so about 65 miles away from the Iron Curtain, when Germany, during my youth, was separated until obviously 1989, where the wall broke. But since we're on camera and this is going to be publicly available, I'll say my greatest thank you and gratitude to those of the greatest generation, because without them and the following generations after that, my life would not have been possible. My family's life and German life in general wouldn't have been possible because of American involvement in the Second World War and pushing back, the approaching Russians from the other side. And that there was a firewall put in between. Sadly, it divided Germany and ran through Germany. But American security after the Second World War really enabled the economic condition that Germany experienced after the Second World War. If it wasn't for the tens of thousands of people, American GIs that were stationed in Germany, who knows how it all would have ended up, right?
But in your town, Red Army never set a foot in your town.
No, we were actually, so after the Second World War, West Germany was divided into 4 parts. Those were influenced by the British. Well, Germany as a whole was separated into 4 parts. The western side was under British, French, and American influence. I lived in a part of Germany which was heavily influenced by the British, and we had British garrison around us. I grew up in a town, small town, country town, about 30 miles away from the Dutch border. I will be thankful to especially those of the greatest generation and the follow-on generations, because there was a lot of tax money that flowed from America to Germany to enable that security, to ensure that security. So that's why I'm heavily and unabashedly pro-American.
That's great to hear. That's the feeling I wish more people would share, whether they were born here or they came from afar, from near sometimes. But let me ask you. So you were thinking United States one day will become your home, right? Or how did the thought develop?
No, it was absolutely accidental. There was a childhood friend of mine whose family was sent over here to the United States. We opened up the company that both of us worked for, and his father was a senior executive and opened a plant here in Georgia. They were sent over here through some mutual friends. I ended up visiting in the spring of '91. Met somebody, and we kind of eloped. I got married to her, and then I got married to her and moved over here. That was my first wife. And in October of 1991, I arrived on the shores of America.
Fantastic.
It was absolutely accidental. There was no plan. Growing up, my teenage years, I've always been impressed with the United States of America, just simply because of what we learned. And what I learned at that point about the country, but I had no ambition, and I didn't have a life's ambition that I would end up in the United States. That was purely accidental.
In my family, it was a little bit different, of course, because it was kind of, in some way, it was earlier because the men were trying to take families out of Russia, out of Ukraine at the time. And they would come to the United States at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, and try to make a living here and save some money and buy tickets and get the family out of Russia to the United States. And what I know was that basically they would take people one by one, and one story was that the man who saved, I think he was saving for like 5 years, and he gave money to somebody to help him to buy tickets and to do the papers, and the man disappeared. So it was another 5 years or so, in years definitely, to save up enough to make a second attempt to do so. And eventually all the female members of the family, all the daughters, and then the father, my great-grandfather, after whom I am named, Ira, he came here in mid-30s, I'm not sure, 34, 38. Ellis Island was closed at the time, so he went through a different route, and he died here in 1944, buried in Queens. It's different. And we stayed in the Soviet Union until 1996 when I came here. So you came here, yeah. So you came to the States. What job did you take? How was it in general, or was it?
So I worked in a plastics manufacturing company after I first got here in 1991, and then I had to, because of my age, I was 20 at the time. I had to register with Selective Service, just like every young man has to do in America. And was contacted by a recruiter for the United States Marine Corps, and a little while later, on the 25th of January 1993, I stepped on the yellow footprints in Parris Island, South Carolina, and experienced some very, very good years. I mean, it was very interesting. It was without any doubt, it was challenging, but it was some of the most memorable period in my life that I wouldn't trade.
Was there much contrast between your civilian life before, in terms of what you experienced at the Marines, being a Marine, going through the boot camp, right? Because I am not very good at military vocabulary.
I mean, first of all, you are subjected to an additional justice, or you're subject, or I don't know how to properly phrase it, but you have to deal with the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So your entire life kind of has an additional set of laws that you have to adhere to. You have to maintain your hair a certain way. You have to maintain your beard. I mean, no beard for the other than a mustache for the Marine Corps at that time. I'm not sure what the regulations are these days. They are certain. You're supposed to present yourself 24/7 in a certain way in public. Don't run around in raggedy clothes. I mean, it influences your life, but I think in a positive way. I think a lot of people going through boot camp and their experience in the Marine Corps, it helps them mature and find themselves. I mean, I'm obviously, as you can imagine, a member of some Marine Corps groups, and they're only the smallest amount of people that come right out and say, you know what, this was the worst time of my life. I think most of us haven't gone through it in different disciplines with different exposures, with different experiences, come out of it having matured some and having found ourselves.
No, absolutely. What I want to ask you something. So you served mainly here, or where did you go overseas?
So I spent a year in Japan from May of 1995 to May of 1996. I spent some time in various states around the country. So the exposure was great. I obviously being in Japan when I first got stationed in Japan, this was on the island of Okinawa, which is the southernmost island of the Japanese island chain, which is also the site of the last amphibious battle that the Marine Corps was involved in the Second World War. It was actually a really interesting story. When the Marines came, it had been drilled into the Japanese people that Americans are savages, and there are stories of a lot of people jumping off cliffs and to their death because they didn't want to be exposed to the savage Americans that were.
It's amazing how emotional they are. They kind of look to us. I'm kind of. I grew up. I'm Jewish. I came from southern part of Soviet Union, Uzbekistan, and we look at Japanese as some people who have very strong character and strong outlook on life, and all of a sudden you hear how so many people there have such a fragile psyche, and they tend to do things to themselves, right? That in most parts people don't do that often.
No, I think it was It was shocking to the Americans that were involved in that landing on Okinawa. Yeah, it's
No, and also the loss of military defeat, I think, also bore heavily on their mind. Somehow, people don't take it lightly. Some people.
Yeah, I think it was difficult to realize. I mean, I can imagine that it was difficult after the great assault on Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December of 1941. That and then the island hopping campaign, and to end up on the outskirts. I mean, it was Japanese mainland, one of the islands, but on the southernmost end of Japan. So that was interesting exposure. It was something that I have not experienced before, being obviously in Asia, but it was an experience that I think was enriching, and unfortunately was during really bad circumstances, because just a little while before I had gotten there, before I arrived on Okinawa, one of the American service members had raped a little young Japanese girl there. So there were some anti-American sentiment, and there were demonstrations, and we had to be careful going off the base. But overall, it was a life-enriching experience, I would say.
I read about when I was working with Katzs Deli. It's a place that had this "Send a salami to your boy in the army" since World War II, a slogan. So they would send salamis. It started with relatives serving as a tail gunner. So they would send him some salamis, and then it became kind of sideline and tagline in their business: "Send a salami to your boy in the army." And as such, I came across a lot of material about military and life in the military. People I spoke with who served in Iran and Afghanistan, who were in active forces. And when people remembered World War II, not those, of course, but those who served then, they were saying that military was the place where people met from different parts of the country. So people who never saw, say, a black man in their lives, who came from a white neighborhood, they never left their neighborhood. So they would see, and they had to communicate with each other, and they had to find common language, and to what is called in newspapers the brotherhood of people who are set with the common goal, common task, common endeavor. They have to get along. They have to work on. Were there serious shocks for you when you saw people from different parts? You were a stranger to this country at first, and then you met people who you would never know otherwise, right? Was it the case with you? I'm sorry, it was a little bit muddled question, but
no, I understand. No, I agree with that. There are certainly some, and this is not necessarily a racial thing. There were just people from other ways of life, from other geographies, from other that grew up totally different than I grew up. Naturally, most people that I met while in the Marine Corps did grow up completely different than I grew up, because obviously they didn't grow up in Germany. But it was drilled into us from the very beginning that we're all green and we all bleed red. So there was never. I didn't experience racial, ethnic tension in the Marine Corps that I can remember anything that stands out. I mean, I'm sure that's not everybody's experience is the same, and I'm sure that there are people running around who have their own opinions which don't align with the military. So I'm sure that the experiences vary, but to me it was. I mean, for example, I met some Hispanic personnel that I served with, and got exposed to some of their lives and some of their customs. And my neighbors, this is when I was living in the barracks in base housing, not base housing, but the barracks in Okinawa. The neighbors to our room were a couple of Black Marines, and I mean that there wasn't any animosity. There wasn't constant fighting and constant arguments. That we all green.
Let me ask you this. So after you were done with the service, right? It was 6 years, as you said, as a Marine.
Yeah, it was 8 years. Yes.
8 years. Wow. So after 8 years, what turn did your life take? What was the next thing that you endeavored to do?
Obviously, looking
as a Marine was your background in.
So the military is not just people running around as infantry or.
Sure.
I mean, there are all kinds of different jobs in the military to make military organization and military readiness possible. So there's anything from
war is logistics.
Absolutely, you have to supply those, on the front lines. So there are lawyers, there are cooks, there are drivers, truck drivers, there are just any number of different things. There are all kinds of propulsion engineers. There are mechanics. There are people that keep the technicians that keep helicopters going, people that keep planes going, people that have to know nuclear stuff for the Navy to make sure that the nuclear reactors and the submarines and the aircraft carriers work right. So I ended up in my first 4 years working in the supply organization. And in my second enlistment, so the second 4 years, I ended up working in IT. So coming out of the Marine Corps, I obviously looking for a job, and I ended up in the IT world. And
so it prepared you for the next, yeah.
Yes, I personally learned a useful skill in the military, and I think that holds true for probably a lot of people. That you can, when you have conversations with pilots flying for American or Delta or United or whatever, a lot of them are former military pilots that took the skill that they acquired in the military into their civilian life. There are some, I'm sure, not that I know this, but I'm sure there are some people that deal with the nuclear propulsion afterward, and then after the military career end up in nuclear power plants and put their skills to good use.
It's kind of pisses me off so often when people have no idea how military works, or they don't know how business works, and they don't know pretty much nothing outside of what they learned at the university, some course of discipline that I don't know. It's hard to get employed by doing things that people learn to choose to specialize in today many times, and especially when they finish, sometimes they kind of, after spending $250,000 they on education, they see that only intern can get a job with their skill set.
So since you mentioned university, I'll just add to that. I mean, there's a lot of efforts on the military side to allow people to make time to provide the mechanisms for people to, even on ships, to take some university courses remotely and get certified. There are a lot of universities that the Department of Defense works with to enable while people are in the military, for them to take university courses, college courses, and actually end up and put them on a path to completing their degrees. So this is actually something that the Department of Defense, I would say, cares about.
Let me ask you something. I want to steer a conversation. I think we will be kind of coming to the climax of our video now, and I wanted to ask you about racism. As a white man, obviously, you have no say in this matter, right? You know nothing about it. So do I. And we kind of don't know a lot of things about a lot of things, but what business you think in the United States would benefit from anything racist? I mean, I'm looking at it from the ancient Roman point of view. Cui bono, cui prodis, you know? Who profits from people being racists in the States? Because this, as we know, in our society, it's the element of success. If somebody profiteers from something, then they will get more of it, right? Like, I don't know, jeans, chewing gum, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can't think of a business that could profit because I don't associate with those businesses. But I'm sure that there are certain businesses that cater to a certain group of individuals that most people wouldn't associate with. I think the greatness in America lies in the fact that we can peacefully coexist. So I don't know. I can't tell you.
I cannot either think of it. I mean, except for the people like politicians and people like Al Sharpton, people who are stirring the pot, and they understand that everybody has some grievances. There is no nation on earth, small or big, who wouldn't have any grievances, who wasn't conquered or conquered somebody and caused a lot of problems to other people. But groveling before each other is not the way to kind of live this life.
No, I think we need to sell. I think the diversity of America is one of the nation's strength, and I think it's something to be celebrated. And those that want to damage the fact that we as a very diverse society can get
That's
along
the strength.
And make America as successful as America has been for, well, ever since, I guess you could take that back to 1776, but even in the most recent past, I mean, the fact, the influence that we had in the world. I mean, look at, it's as silly as looking at McDonald's, looking at Coca-Cola, looking at these American iconic brands that have spread all over the world. I mean, Coca-Cola is one of the great examples. There's a great Coca-Cola commercial from several decades back, and I forget what it's called. It's like Cheer Around the World or a Coke Around the World or something, which really celebrates the differences. I mean,
Listen,
and we all, in the end, we're all individuals.
I adore Spanish cuisine. And you come to Madrid, you come to Barcelona, what you see there, KFC is packed. McDonald's is packed. In those countries, we admire their food. In France, McDonald's is packed. People, they have their own twists, you know, that our people here would not welcome. They have little olive oil bottles in Italy, so you can put on your salad some sprinkles of extra virgin olive oil. All those mannerism recipes, all this stuff they maintain. But American culture is something that people kind of look, as they say, like down the nose, right? They
And I completely disagree with that. I mean, there's in Europe, you'll often find people that say things like there's no culture in America, which I completely disagree with. I think there's a great American culture. There's a great can-do spirit in America, and that really is manifests itself in the society that we have built here.
Yeah.
So I don't subscribe to the view that there is no culture in America. I think there's a great culture in America. I mean, if you look back on some of and I've had this conversation with many people back home. I mean, and, you know, sometimes the old churches, the old domes, the old cathedrals are viewed as magnificent pieces of European society or European ability. And then my first thought is when I look at a huge cathedral, one of the last ones we were in was in France in Mont Saint Michel, which is a kind of an island. Yeah, near Normandy.
Tide comes and goes, yeah.
Yeah, and the first thing that I see when I look at that is how many people must have died when this was built.
You're wrong. Don't think
they weren't paid. I mean, these were laborers that were being forced to build these monuments to the church, and I don't think
not necessarily, but it's a big conversation, of course. In my opinion, this was like there are theories that the pyramids were also not were built as much by the slaves, by the enslaved Jews, which is kind of food for thought for so many generations. So who am I to break it? But a lot of people, when you think about the logistics of building the pyramid, you have to get so many people off work. You have to feed so many people. You have to have such a developed thought in terms of organizing it, designing it, planning it. It's just incredible that it could be done by someone who's unwilling to work. And
no, right. So I agree with that part. The piece about the Great Pyramids that I find amazing is that it was possible to even build them. That they came up with considering the technology available at that time, to put those huge blocks in place and make these pyramids happen.
I came across fantastic videos, like models of how ancient Greek theater worked, and it's stunning how their thought was moving in the way of presenting the scenery. So they would have the drums or sort of prisms with three sides, and they would turn night to day to a garden. So they would change the scenery in those very static theater. We think that people would come, just sit there, and people in mass would be yelling at them, right? There was a whole behind-the-scenes machinery serving all this, and it's so sophisticated that actually the machine that was hoisting gods, say, or make them descend on the scene, that's the element that was called the machina.
Okay.
Machina. That's where the word machine comes from, and that's and the ancients are the subject of my fascination. I think that, I mean, there's so many people before me, but of course we kind of look to the future, but the answer is in the past, because future is inevitable and we cannot know it.
Very, very true, and that's why history is important, right? That's you can learn lessons from history and not repeat them.
Tom, it's such a pleasure talking to you.
Same here.
I think that, thank you. I think that we may come back. We kind of mark the territory, as the dogs say. So we'll revisit. We'll see how things go, what grew up there, and Semper Fi. Am I allowed to say it?
I enjoyed this. Thank you very much. This was great.
Thank you for your service, sir.
You're welcome.